weird performance art stuff for the, talent shows and stuff like that. And my mother, and so I was in high school in the 80s, and my mom enrolled me in like some physical theater and mask classes, and introduced me to commedia and, some of these other forms of mime and all this. And interestingly, clown was not in the vocabulary of that at the time. And like I took a class with Avner, Avner the eccentric,
Yeah, I've had him on Clown-versations.
Oh, you have? Okay. So like as a teen, like I took courses with him, but it was like physical theater, I think is what they were calling it.
Yeah.
So even as I was doing other kinds of acting, other kinds of work after I moved to Chicago and started performing on stage in the early 90s, the mode was clown. It was a visceral, open state, even when I was doing scripted work. And this is a later analysis, right? Like I didn't know that's what I was doing, but there was a way that I was connecting to other actors and the material and even the audience, right? It was not quite the stage acting maybe that everyone's doing, right? And like I go back to college, where like the kind of like hyper realism or heightened realism was very in, and like Mammoth was something that everybody was doing at the time, and I hated it. Like I just thought it was boring and mean, and I was like, where am I in this work even, right? And so my tendency, like for one of my projects, I remember I did Edna St. Vincent Millay's Aria da Capo, which is this weird little play that has commedia characters in it, and the whole theater department was like, like, what are you doing? And yeah, but so anyway, there was something I was already doing, a way I was connecting in my performance that was recognized by other clowns as like, oh, you're a clown. And at first I was like, no, I'm not. That's not what I am. And then like that whole discussion of me thinking like the people in the garish makeup at a birthday party, right? And then realizing the kind of legacy of clown in multiple cultures. Like I see you have a Kashari as your little logo, right? Is that the little Hopi clown?
Yeah. I mean, it's influenced by that, but then there's the red nose as well. So there's the kind of nod to different traditions.
I see. Yeah. So like learning about, the place of the clown in various, cultures across the world, and connecting, I was connecting more to Lucille Ball, right? Like as in terms of the clown mode, or Buster Keaton, or, those were the kind of where I found myself in terms of mode, but a little weirder than that too, a little strange. Like I'm a little more surreal than that. Yeah.
So that's interesting. So you just now you mentioned the word mean, and that struck me in relation to some other kinds of Mammoth in particular. Yeah. But I think this is a thread, right? And I wonder, in relation to that, or in contrast to that, what is it for you that clowning sort of evokes? Like, what is the point? Why do we do it? What is it that we're trying to do with the audience that's different?
Yeah, that's the question. Like, what are we trying to do? I mean, I see it as invoking ourselves in a state of poetry. And here's what I mean about that. So how poems really zero in, or can really zero in and expand a moment or a site, right? It can make something very small, very expanded. And so in clown performance, I see myself as being a form of poetry and balancing the raw and the refined and the chaotic and the ordered and the magnified and the specified, and kind of expanding all of the aspects around a moment, right? And that there's something in the, and I don't have very sophisticated language around this, right? Except that in respect to other kinds of theater, right? Like living room dramas, right? Where someone comes home with a secret, you know, and everybody's together and like something happens and everything's very linear, right? But our experience, or at least my experience of almost anything, is never linear. There's all this stuff going on all at the same time, right? So even as like you and I are having this conversation, it's a very, you know, we're talking about a very specific subject. Like I'm noticing like all of the images behind you. I'm thinking about the fact that I like this chair I chose is maybe not the best chair to be sitting on. And that makes me think of like, oh, I've got this hip thing that's been bothering me, you know, and like, so our experiences of moments are not this kind of pared down linear, first this happens, then this happens. That's not how I experience life at all. And so my part of what I think I'm doing with clown, with an audience, with my partners, right, is experiencing all of these other things that happen around like a realistic moment or whatever the thing is, right? And that it expands into the psychological, right? So like how you're thinking or feeling about whatever the action is you're doing on stage. And like if there's a history behind this action, if there's a future on the other side of, and like that all of these things are kind of at our disposal to make about like whatever we're doing, making a sandwich, right? Like whatever the action of the piece is, that we have the full experience of it to reach for and put in the performance of it. So like, I think that's realistic, because I think that's how our brains and experiences of things work, more than like, first this happens and then this happens. And I feel this thing in an uncomplicated way. I'm angry, you know, like that most plays set up something that's quite unrealistic in terms of the human experience. It's quite pared down and like I said, like linear is not really
That's
how
super interesting. I just want to take a pause just to welcome anybody who's jumping on, who's jumped on in the last few minutes. I think we had a little problem right at the beginning of the stream, and I'm not sure that we were live, but we are now. So people might have joined at any point. I'm not really quite sure in that wonderful discussion we had a few minutes into it. So wherever you are, and also we're not seeing the comments on our page here, but I think on the YouTube channel people are writing. So if you have any questions for Molly, please just write them into the comments, or any thoughts about what we're saying. It's really lovely to hear from you and make this whole thing kind of a more of a community conversation, Clown-versation. So I will see your comments if you write them. Molly, coming back to that, what you were just saying, I mean, one word that's often used in relation to clowning a lot is truth. I think, you know, in the clowning I do anyway, that we are kind of truth. I don't know, we're trying to get to an inner truth, or something like that. We're trying to reveal something that's true about, firstly, about ourselves, right? When we stand up and we choose to clown in front of people, because there's obviously an element of clowning. Well, perhaps I shouldn't say obviously, because maybe it's not how you see it. But for me, there's always an element of self-revelation. Like I am working with material that it comes from the stupidity and the silliness and the flaws and the imperfections that that are me and that make me kind of who I am. So you were talking about the real, you know, and that clowning is more real in some ways than conventional linear narrative theatre, which I totally buy. And is that the same then as truth, or is truth something different? Like, what does that word mean to you in relation to real?
Truth and real? Ah, boy, I don't know. I may have been used. I may be able to use those kind of interchangeably in what I'm talking about specifically, which is maybe like authentic, right? Like,
that's another good one.
Experience. Truth, I have a real, I'm having a tricky time with my relationship to the word truth because of its being really manipulated. The use of the word truth being manipulated by people who I don't agree with their worldview, right? And so like, you know, things being like, oh, let's get to the truth. And I'm like, I think you're like really orchestrating a well-detailed lie, which is totally not the truth, right? So like the word truth, I'm like, nervous about, because I don't know that I know what it means anymore. Like I used to think it meant some kind of measurable, authentic, like reality, right? Like that's how that it's somewhere in there. Now that being said, right, truth is somewhat subjective. Two people can remember an incident quite differently because we've experienced it differently. I think maybe the clown thing, right? Our own, whatever, when we're in that clown state, whatever our own truth, getting to our own authentic state, right? Like that's our job, as opposed to saying something that is true. Does that make sense?
Right. It's like trying to stand in our truth, perhaps.
Yeah. Stand in your own truth, because truth seems to be subjective.
I agree totally. So what did you do? The story you just told us about sort of how you discovered that what you were doing and what you loved was really clowning. Was there a point at which you were like, oh yeah, I'm a clown and I need to go and do clown training? Or
there was. So I was working at Navy Pier in Chicago, which is this huge tourist, site in Chicago, out on a pier. And at the time, I don't know that they have this anymore, they had quite a robust entertainment program. They had all kinds of entertainment there for a chunk of time there, late 90s to kind of early aughts. And I started there in like a comedy sports style improv team that performed 8 20-minute sets a day at Navy Pier. And so I was doing, and I'd been doing some like short form improv, for a bit in Chicago. But once again, like what I brought to it was something that was less up here, right? My humor tended to move from the body, right, as opposed to like pop culture references or that sort of thing. I had some of that, but my proposals tended to be physical and often surreal, and so actually I got a call from Big Apple Circus in New York that they were auditioning for their clown care unit, which is a bedside entertainment program. And they had programs all over the country, and they had one in Chicago at University of Chicago Children's Hospital. And Paul Kalina from 500 Clown was the supervisor of the program. And so David Engel, who's a professional clown in New York right now, he has I can't remember the clown's name, but he's like a pirate clown. And he does a lot of work there, but he was like, you should do this. And I was like, what? Me? Like, I'm not. And he's like, no, that's what you're doing. That's what I see you do when you're up there. You're a clown. And I was like, no, I'm not, and of course I was, because I was, again, it's that thing of like, when you use a word in a word, right? Like I didn't have the context of the history and stuff like that. I only had the very immediate understanding what a clown was. And so I auditioned for to be a bedside entertainer, a clown doctor, Big Apple Circus, and much to my surprise, I booked it. I worked with them for 6 years, and at the same time, I went to this. Around the same time, I went out to the West Side, actually, close to where I live now in Chicago, to this like burned out bowling alley, and saw this incredibly deep, bizarre, and dangerous piece called 500 Clown Macbeth. And it had Paul Kalina, Adrian Danzig, and David Engel, the pirate clown, right, in it. And I was like, oh shit, this is great. I want to do this. What is this? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is absolutely what I want to be doing. So I approached them afterwards, and I was like, this is so cool. Like, I loved all of this. This is amazing. And how do I, where else is this happening? And at the time in Chicago, it was actually, there were these kind of, there was Asylum 137, which was a clown team that was here, and Kaput, Dan Griffin's group, and he's out in San Francisco now, I think. But there were these kind of clown groups coming up in the late 90s, early aughts in Chicago. So it was happening. And so like I, went to see more stuff, and it was always in like weird spaces, it was always in the, and then David was going to move to New York. And so Paul and Adrian said, hey, we're looking for our third. We want to keep doing this show. Do you want to come and do this with us?
Wow.
Do you audition? Do you want to audition? And I was like, yeah. And the audition was, I was like, what do I prepare? And they're like, nothing, just come. And I was just given a series of impossible tasks to do with them. And that was the audition. And it went on forever and ever. And it was really hard. And I remember I just after that, I went to visit I think this is when it was, I went to visit my parents, and I was like, if I don't get this, then I'm not sure what I'm going to do, because I think I really want to do this, and I haven't really wanted something. It's very rare, actually, Barnaby, that I'm like, I really want this. Like, I don't really live that way. Especially as an actor, because like there's so much that I just live this life of, oh, that might be cool. Sure, I'll come read for that, unless I'm producing the thing myself. Like when you're auditioning, who knows? But with this, I had that want, and it worried me, because I was like, I really want to do this. And if I don't do this, I'm not sure what my life looks like after. And then I started thinking about, what would my life, would I just, maybe I'll start making this kind of work on my own, whatever. Well, I booked it. I got it. And then, worked with 500 Clown for 12 years. And that was like the beginning of my training, really, like the conscious training of clown training.
Yeah.
Big Apple Circus. I went to New York for 3 weeks and trained to be a clown doctor, which it was clown workshops, but then it was also like child life safety and like what it is to work in a hospital, right? So I did that. Cool. And this is cool. At the same time, I was training to be a clown doctor. It was the International Jim Henson Puppet Festival in New York. So like I was training as a clown all day and going to see puppet shows at night. And I was like, I'm doing it. This is like, this is my life. I think this is success. I'm succeeding. Right. And then I booked 500 Clown, and we were making that work together. So yeah. And then training I trained with a couple, Miha Tab was someone that I worked with quite a bit, who's a French-Israeli clown, who spends some time here in the US. Did a little work with Sue Morrison, and more work with Abner. And mostly, though, I have to say, I pretty much apprenticed off Paul and Adrian on stage.
Yeah.
Like that was mostly my training. And also like their expanded education, because Adrian was like, you know, Lecoq, and Paul was more of a like Italian tradition. And so like just through talking, like learning history stuff, vocabulary, technique. So a lot of my training was actually just on my feet on stage, and then, you know, off stage, you know, talking about what went, like what went down that night, what to do next time, that kind of stuff. So
give us a little insight into that process with 500 Clown. Like, you know, what is it like making the shows and then that sort of transition into performing them, and how they evolved? Because I'm sure it must have been amazing
well, so like the basic structure, so we only had 4 shows over 12 years, and we kind of just built and rebuilt, and the way it worked was we would have things we knew were going to happen. This, you know, this action is going to happen, this action is going to happen. We had like an action script, and end to end would be like, if we just went straight through the, you know, the planned acro, you know, and the planned material is like 35 minutes, 40 minutes, you know. But you get in front of an audience and it expanded by 20 minutes, because the mode of moving through the material is we don't know how we get from, there's this moment we know, and this moment we don't know, but this moment we know, and what we don't know is like, there's this space in between my thumbs, like how, what is the journey from here to here? The space is going to tell us the space we're in. The audience is going to tell us, the room is going to tell us, or we're going to tell each other how we get from this moment to this moment, right? And so it's 2 things. It's building stage-worthy material that we know is going to happen, and then also building a way of being aware, like acutely aware of the environment, and having immediate access to our impulses and responses. So like very, very active listening, watching and paying attention to what's happening, and then allowing whatever the proposal is in the space we don't know to build the path between actions. So that was, so it's like two different works, right? And it was, it was a thrill.
And sometimes presumably you find, like, was it always like, say, moving from piece A to piece B, that transition there, was it always very different, or did it start to, over time, start to mold itself into some kind of material that got repeated?
Sometimes it did, and then we'd have to evaluate whether we wanted that or not. And sometimes we cut stuff around that phenomenon, either because we're like, actually now this is the like prepared piece, and this that used to be something we knew is now going to be something we don't know anymore.
Oh, interesting.
Right? So like it, and that was something Paul always talked about, was like the continual crafting. So instead of just like learning it in some kind of tight way and doing it the same every time, instead like having this framework that can move and change based on where we are as performers, who the audience is that night, what space we're in, like all that kind of stuff. So it was a very active, you know, constantly writing on your feet, in addition to having to like have a high level of physical prowess to do the acro parts of the show.
Yeah.
You know, so like balancing those two skill sets. And
did those sort of improvised bits flop horribly sometimes?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And like part of the, like 500 Clown was actually first called F, the letter F, like a failing grade, like a red F.
Nice.
Part, right? That's what the company was first called, was F.
I like it.
And the show was called 500 Clown. But then our audience called us 500 Clown, and we're like, okay, nobody cares about it. 500 Clown is what we're called. Great. But we were still moving from the place of being able to fail and to build material from that failure, so that you put forward a proposal, it tanks, and then that builds whatever the thing is. But like, right, never allowing failure to shut down the process, but rather hoping, like, you set up like these precarious, like we'd set up this precarious shit on stage, you know, that was like, so that you have to focus to make it work. And if it doesn't work, then, well, you play in the failure, right? But that things are risky enough all the time that there's like a likelihood of failure night to night, and that is actually where you mine some of the deeper clown stuff, is in that failure.
Risk is another one of those words that gets used a lot, right, in clown.
Yeah.
But it can mean sort of different things to different people. For you, what is it? What is that? Say goodbye to everyone, and thank you so much again, Molly, for being with us. Really super grateful. Appreciate it. And I'm going to say goodbye to you. Bye-bye, Molly. And goodbye to everyone. Thank you so much for being with us again for another Clown-versation. Super wonderful, as always. And next week, we're going to be with Ricardo Puccetti from Brazil, from the amazing Lume Teatro, an incredible clown performer and good friend. And I'm really looking forward to talking to him. So join me again next week for another cool Clown-versation. Bye, everybody.